Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Sherrone Moore, Michigan, kicking off fall camp. And although we are very early into our fall camp conversation, you're starting to get some not only player buzz, but some intriguing storylines to talk about as well as we work through the next couple of weeks. And look, here's the thing. I don't think in this episode we're going to talk one time about quarterback Bryce Underwood. Now, look, we've talked a lot about Bryce Underwood. We going to talk a lot about Bryce Underwood over the next couple of weeks. He is the biggest storyline for Michigan rolling into 2025. But I think a lot of Michigan fans who follow this program pretty dang closely understand a lot of other intriguing position battles, intriguing players that are going to be dang important to Michigan rolling into 2025. And I want to start this episode out with one of my personal favorite Michigan football players ever, and also a player that's going to be very important to Michigan in 2025, and that is Rod Moore. Haven't talked a ton about Rod Moore because we're not exactly sure how to talk about him. Well, we get a little bit more information. He sat down with Sam Webb at 24/7 Sports. Excellent interview. I would go check that out and shed a little bit more light, gave us a little bit more information on Rod Moore, how healthy is he, and what the timeline looks for him getting back on the football field. Number one, we got to understand what happened. Tore his ACL early in spring practice last year. What many of us did not know was there was a second surgery that took place to repair a meniscus. They missed it on the first surgery, had to get another surgery to repair the meniscus. That's why this injury rehab has taken as long as it has for Rod Moore. Now, what we're hearing from Rod Moore now is 80 to 85% back. He's back to sprinting. He's back to cutting. What it sounds like Rod Moore said is, hey, I am back getting healthy. Now I just got to learn how to play football again because it's important to remind ourselves that he hasn't played a snap of real football in over 18 months. And so why is Rod Moore so important to talk about? That's kind of the main event. That's kind of what I want to talk about. Number one, even if Rod Moore only gets back to 90% of what he was in 2023, you're looking at one of the best safeties in the country. I feel very comfortable saying that. I think he's one of the most underrated players from that national championship team we saw in 2023. But it's less about Rod Moore individually, and in my opinion, more about what he brings to this Michigan defense, where look at this Michigan secondary. I think it's very, very talented. And Jair Hill very well could be a first-round NFL draft pick. We all know what a guy like Shamari Earls has the capability of bringing to Michigan. It's going to be a little bit new. It's going to be young, and it's going to be new. Right? You have the Metcalf brothers who are probably both going to play a decent amount. You're probably going to see a little bit of Shamari Earls as a true freshman. You got a couple of new faces that were rotational guys last year that are probably going to be starting for Michigan in 2025. Rod Moore's the glue. This is a talented secondary that has new faces and a lot of youth. What better player to inject into this secondary than a guy like Rod Moore, who not only is a very, very good safety, makes this Michigan defense better individually, but also is like the field general of this defense, something that Michigan didn't really have to start off the 2024 season. I mean, we all remember that, look, Michigan's defense was never bad in 2024, but there was a stark difference between the Michigan defense we saw to start 2024 and the defense that we saw to end it. I think a large part of Michigan starting off quote unquote slow on defense was they didn't really have that field general. Your best football players for Michigan were on the defensive line. Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore. Those guys were very good for Michigan, but it's hard for them to be the field generals when they're on the line of scrimmage. Ernest Hausman kind of emerged into that role late, but that was only late. And I think that's one of the reasons why Michigan took a step towards the back half of 2024, getting Rod Moore back. And then obviously Ernest Hausman coming back as well. You talk about not only really good football players, some of the better football players that we see in this conference. We're also talking about guys that are going to have massive impacts on everybody else around them on defense, both at the safety spot and at the off-ball linebacker spot. That is what intrigues me the most about Rod Moore's return. And I don't think anybody knows when that return is going to be. But I think we're feeling pretty confident that Rod Moore is going to get back on the football field for Michigan. And when he does, the impact that this kid can have on I shouldn't call him a kid anymore, he's a grown man. the impact that Rod Moore can have on this Michigan defense is legit. It goes far beyond him just being a good safety. That's what excites me the most about Rod Moore. Now, I want to get into some other sneaky storylines that I've been thinking about, you might say, over the last couple of weeks. Before we get into it, as always, the Michigan fans, appreciate you guys. It's going to be fun. Buckle up, as Wink Martindale would say. A lot of really fun storylines to talk about over the next couple of weeks. I promise you, we'll talk plenty about Bryce Underwood. The amount of support y'all been showing the boys been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. Want to start with this offensive line. Now, I lied to you. I said, hey, we ain't going to mention Bryce Underwood. Well, we're going to mention Bryce Underwood real quick in terms of, hey, we want to make sure we're not only protecting Bryce Underwood, but we're giving Bryce Underwood a run game to lean on. Like the offensive line we've talked about a lot was just not what we expected, not what we're used to in the 2024 year. At points, it was a liability, but at the very best, it was just average. I don't think any Michigan fan would get up here and say our offensive line play was above average in 2024. That's the first time we said that in a very long time. Can we get back to using this offensive line as a weapon? The young offensive lineman that can push for playtime. One of the things that I look for is what do the body types look like going into fall camp? Because regardless of how you want to talk about offensive linemen, what holds a lot of freshmen back from playing early is just the physicality of the sport, especially in the Big Ten. When you're an 18-year-old kid going up against 22-year-old men, are you physical? Do you have the physicality there to kind of compete along the lines of scrimmage in the Big Ten? Well, Andrew Babaloa, he gained 10 pounds in the summer. He's up to 315 pounds. Ty Haywood, a guy that we haven't talked necessarily a ton about, he's up to 316 pounds. And so both of the five-star freshmen that I think many Michigan fans are looking for, hey, can they play a role for us in 2025? They're both looking the part. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen the pictures of Andrew Babaloa. He looks like a starting left tackle in the Big Ten. Ty Haywood, we haven't really seen a ton about because he wasn't in for us with spring practice. I mean, he looks like, and I'll say this about Ty Haywood, Andrew Babaloa has a higher ceiling as a football player. Like if Andrew Babaloa maximizes what he can be, he's probably going top 10 in the NFL draft. The ceiling might not be as high with a guy like Ty Haywood. Really, really polished individual, like knows what he's doing on the offensive line, coming from a big time school down there in the state of Texas. Ty Haywood's a guy I could see maybe starting in the two deep because he wasn't in for spring practice, but being a piece for Michigan on the offensive line at some point in 2025. If Andrew Babaloa, if he wins that job, you might be talking about Evan Link kicking into right guard and competing for Nathan Afobe. That's probably what excites me the most about Michigan on the offensive line this year. There's really two things. Number one, you get a lot of guys back who didn't have starting experience. Although Gio El-Hadi and Greg Crippen were within Michigan's program for the last couple of years, they didn't have much starting experience. And so they got their feet wet last year. So you're returning a lot of experience. Guys like Greg, Gio, Evan Link, who pretty much started the whole season for Michigan in 2024. You also have a lot more depth. You also have a lot more players that you think can play winning football for Michigan up front, which allows Michigan to get creative in terms of how they want to use these bodies and where they want to play them. I think there's a good chance that Evan Link can be a much better guard than he was at tackle for Michigan. Well, if Andrew Babaloa beats Evan Link out, one, we know Babs is ready to play. And number two, we might get a better version of Evan Link if he ends up kicking into guard. The position flex and the amount of bodies that seemingly Michigan trusts to play in 2025, that's what's given me confidence with this Michigan offensive line. And as much as we want to talk about the pass catchers and what the passing attack is going to look like, you want to make sure, number one, you're keeping Bryce clean in the pocket. But number two, you want to give Bryce Underwood a run game that he can lean on. We know we have the horses in the backfield to go out and do it with Jordan Marshall and Justice Haynes. Is the offensive line going to be there for us to really impose our will running the football, which was always something that separated Michigan, especially in the national championship year, is that there was no front seven that Michigan couldn't run the football successfully against. Can we get back to that in 2025? All right, last one. Maybe my favorite or what I'm most excited about. Names that intrigue me. Names that maybe we haven't talked a ton about, but they intrigue me heading into the 2025 season and fall camp. Number one, Nate Marshall. And what intrigues me about Nate Marshall is, hey, we weren't really sure what he was going to look like and what position he was even going to play. He was 6'4", 265 pounds coming out of high school, wasn't with the program in spring practice. Well, he's down to 240. So, number one, that tells us Nate Marshall is going to be playing out on the edge to start off his Michigan career. Number two, that's probably the easier path to playing time for Nate Marshall. If Nate Marshall was going to play on the inside of the defensive line, probably wasn't going to play as a freshman. Number one, because Michigan goes six deep at that position. Number two, Nate Marshall was going to be small and a guy that needed to add some weight before he was ready to play. Well, him staying out on the edge, that gives Nate Marshall a path to maybe not an every down guy, a guy that's not going to start over TJ Guy or Dom Nichols or Derek Moore, but maybe as a pass rush specialist, maybe we can get Nate Marshall on the football field. Probably the most underrated freshman that Michigan landed in 2025. We all talked about Bryce. We all talked about Babs. We all talked about Shamari Earls. Nate Marshall, because he did not come in during spring, we didn't really talk about a ton. Really, really gifted individual. A little bit more of just a raw talent guy as opposed to a really good football player, but he's got the specs and the athleticism out on the edge to maybe contribute in a pass rush specialist role for Michigan in 2025. He's a guy that I think I'm monitoring during fall camp. What do we hear from him? Number two, Kenny Bell. Kenny Bell up to 215 pounds. What intrigues me about Kenny Bell is there's a very clear movement for Sherrone Moore. We are leaning into bigger pass catchers. We didn't think we had the size and speed to push the ball vertically down the field last year. You look at outside of Colston Loveland, it was guys like Tyler Morse, Freddie Moore, Samaj Morgan, not bad wide receivers, but not necessarily big body vertical pass catchers. Kenny Bell's kind of that guy. 6'3", up to 215 pounds, a guy that played quarterback in high school, that transitioned to wide receiver when he came to Michigan, has been dealing with some injuries, played over 320 snaps for Michigan last year, like quietly played a decent amount of football, finally healthy, finally having the body right, filling out the frame. We've talked a ton about Don McCulley, talked a lot about the freshmen, Jamar Broder and Andrew Marsh. Can Kenny Bell be a guy that provides value for Michigan? No, not necessarily just as a starting wide receiver, but a guy that has a special skill set in terms of I'm a big body that can work vertically down the field. We'll see. Andrew Marsh and Jamar Broder have done a great job with their weight. Andrew Marsh up to almost 200 pounds, Jamar Broder 215 pounds. Two guys that have the opportunity to contribute. Last name, and the name that intrigues me the most, Eno Etta. 5 years ago, Eno Etta was, I don't know if he was committed to Michigan at the time, sophomore, junior year of high school. It's like 240 pounds. And he kept growing, graduated high school around 265 pounds, redshirted year one. They made the decision to kick him onto the inside in year two. Very clearly was not ready to play year two on the inside of the defensive line. Well, now he's up to 320 pounds. Eno Etta is now the biggest interior defensive lineman that Michigan has on their roster. Him and Trey Williams are the only guys that are at 320 pounds. Is Eno Etta ready year three? That's a guy that has monster upside because he's got some real length. He's got some real athleticism, just didn't have the physicality and size to play the first 2 years. We make the comparison all the time to a guy like David Ojabo. When David Ojabo committed to Michigan, it was radio silence from him for the first 18 months. Didn't get on the football field, didn't really hear much about him. Well, as year three came around for David Ojabo, you started hearing the feedback that this kid could be special, becomes one of the best pass rushers in the country. I'm not necessarily saying Eno Etta is going to emerge as the best pass rusher in the country from the inside, but can he be that guy that takes a monster jump? Because Michigan's looking, hey, we're deep. We're as deep as we've been on the defensive line since maybe 2023, but going back to those elite defenses, we're deeper than we were last year. Is probably the best way to put it. We're looking for some upside. We're looking for who are the guys that are going to go top 50 in the NFL draft. Rayshawn Benny's got a chance. Trey Pierce has got a chance. Trey Williams, DeMond Payne, I'm not sure if they're going to be going top 100 in the NFL draft, but they're solid football players. Can Eno Etta be a guy that adds to that list? We'll see. 320 pounds, that intrigues me. I'll say that. Very, very exciting players to monitor for Michigan going into fall camp. We'll talk about Bryce when we hear about Bryce, no doubt about it. But there are a lot of other really fun players to monitor. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.